Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're dissecting a fascinating and honestly pretty terrifying maritime disaster. We're going to uncover the exact anatomy of the grounding of the passenger vessel Hamburg. We'll be looking at how a chain of seemingly small, isolated errors compounded into a massive, catastrophic failure. I absolutely love breaking down complex events like this because it reveals so much about how systems and humans actually interact when the pressure is on. So let's get right into it.
Picture this. It's May 2015. The Hamburg is a modern 15,000-ton passenger vessel sailing through the Sound of Mull in Scotland. It's fully crewed, it's packed with advanced navigational technology, and the weather? Totally manageable. Yet, somehow, human and systemic errors perfectly aligned. So, how exactly does a modern, fully crewed ship packed to the brim with tech essentially sail completely blind into a well-known, clearly charted rocky shoal? It's a really compelling mystery, and the answer lies in the subtle, quiet breakdown of teamwork.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at the aftermath here. You're looking at the severe damage sustained by the Hamburg's hull and port propeller. The impact was so incredibly violent, and the structural damage so extensive, that the ship had to be pulled entirely out of service and forced into a dry dock for 3 solid months of repairs. We aren't talking about a minor scrape here. This was a major marine casualty that disrupted hundreds of lives and cost millions of dollars.
To understand how we ended up with a massive ship sitting in dry dock, we need to rewind the clock. Let's look at Section 1, Grounding in the Sound, and examine the environment on the bridge in those crucial moments just before impact.
The physical layout of the Hamburg's bridge actually gives us a vital clue. Notice where the master is standing. He's physically positioned all the way over at the port radar. Meanwhile, the officer of the watch is dealing with an incredibly complex, rapidly escalating traffic situation way over on the starboard side. Because of where he was physically standing, the master was totally isolated. He couldn't see the electronic charts, he couldn't easily monitor the primary navigation tools, and he was completely unable to effectively assist his officer of the watch. It was a physical setup that instantly degraded the entire team's situational awareness. Which brings us to Section 2, a flawed passage plan. Because, the foundation of this disaster wasn't just physical positioning. The groundwork was laid long before the crash.
We have a stark contrast between policy and reality going on here. On one side, the ship's official navigation policy clearly mandated the use of traditional paper charts as the primary means of navigation. But in reality, the officers were relying heavily on an improperly configured electronic system, or ECDIS. This poor planning is exactly what caused them to approach the local navigational buoy completely incorrectly. They were living in this highly dangerous gap between what they were supposed to be doing on paper and what they actually did in practice. Because this electronic system was unapproved and honestly used pretty casually, the passage plan lacked critical safety details. Things like safety margins, abort points, and safe anchorage zones completely missing from the digital map. The bridge team was basically relying on a screen that was starving them of the exact safety data they needed to avoid a disaster.
But wait, it gets worse. As we dig into Section 3, silencing the safety tools, we see the crew didn't just ignore proper planning. They intentionally silenced the very tools designed to save their lives.
The sheer number of disabled safety features here is just shocking. The bridge team had manually gone into the settings and switched off the ECDIS alarm buzzer. They disabled the Look Ahead feature. They completely ignored the Predicted Movement tools. Even the bridge navigational watch alarm system, the BNWAS, was switched off. In an effort to, maybe reduce nuisance alarms, they intentionally blinded and deafened their own safety net. When the ship sailed straight toward danger, the computers that were supposed to be screaming at them remained completely silent.
When you disable your automated safety alarms, what do you have left? Well, you have to rely on your team, but as we'll see in Section 4, working in dangerous isolation, that reliance failed entirely because the crew was working in a state of psychological detachment.
There is a truly chilling micronarrative revealed right on the physical paper chart. Just 7 minutes before the crash, both the officer of the watch and a junior cadet plotted the ship's position. The officer of the watch plotted an incorrect, quote-unquote, safe position. The cadet, however, correctly plotted a position showing the ship heading straight into danger. But out of fear of challenging the senior officer, the cadet silently erased his correct calculation. He literally saw the danger, but the culture of isolation on that bridge kept him quiet. I want to read this quote directly from the official investigation report because it honestly summarizes the tragedy perfectly. The individuals on the bridge were working in isolation, with no recognition of their individual responsibilities, and therefore unable to provide the master with the assistance he required. Think about that. There was absolutely zero shared mental model. Without a culture where you can challenge your superiors, they were really just a bunch of individuals standing in the same room, slowly drifting into a disaster. Add to that isolation a sudden, massive spike in cognitive load. In the critical 4 minutes right before the crash, the Hamburg found itself sandwiched between 3 other ships, the Sea Explorer 1, the Nollan, and the Yeoman Bridge. The radio was blazing with confusing, contradictory instructions. The officer of the watch was agreeing to erratic maneuvers that completely broke standard navigation rules just to get out of the way. The team was completely, hopelessly overwhelmed by the moving traffic.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Look at how the Hamburg was completely boxed in by those 3 other vessels. The bridge team became entirely fixated on avoiding a collision with the moving ships around them. Their situational awareness narrowed down so dramatically that they completely forgot to monitor their position relative to the massive, static, unmoving hazard right in front of them, the new Rocks Shoal.
At 1328, that distraction proved fatal, and the Hamburg violently struck the rocky shoal. We now enter Section 5. The chaotic aftermath. Now, you would expect a highly trained crew to immediately execute an organized emergency response, right? Let's see what actually happened.
The ship had a comprehensive grounding checklist that explicitly laid out the steps. Stop the engines to assess damage, sound the general alarm to muster the crew, close the watertight doors, and notify the authorities. Astonishingly, they managed to ignore absolutely every single one of them. The general alarm never sounded. The Coast Guard never called. They just kept the ship moving.
Instead of stopping to figure out if his ship was sinking, the master made an incredibly ill-considered attempt to anchor in Tobermory Bay. He dropped just 5 shackles of anchor chain in 61 meters of water while facing gale-force winds, which is basically a mathematical recipe for failure. When the anchor predictably dragged, he aborted the attempt. And then, in perhaps the most shocking decision of the day, he decided to sail the massive passenger vessel all the way to Belfast on the open sea, with only 1 working propeller, entirely blind to the extent of the horrific hull damage right beneath his feet.
How do we even make sense of this? Well, it brings us to Section 6, Failures in Resource Management. Seeing a highly trained team fail so comprehensively really comes down to the core principles of managing resources and human beings.
So the crucial point is this. This was not a technical failure. It was a textbook human factors failure. The core issues read like a manual on what not to do. We're talking a lack of a shared mental model, wildly erratic communication during traffic negotiation, a total loss of situational awareness, and a complete absence of a challenge and response culture. Remember our cadet erasing his correct chart? And finally, when the worst actually happened, they completely failed to execute their error management checklists. The Hamburg grounding is quite literally a masterclass in the breakdown of bridge resource management.
Which brings us to a final, lingering question. Technology can guide a ship, but who is guiding the team? The Hamburg had the radars, they had the electronic charts, they had the checklists, but without leadership demanding rigorous standards and without a team empowered to actually speak up and communicate, all that technology was utterly useless. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how advanced our tools become, safety still fundamentally relies on how effectively humans work together. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a clear, structured understanding of exactly what went wrong in the Sound of Mull. See you next time.